Hello, and thank you for attending the 2020 Sunstone Digital Symposium Session 171, titled Living Trees, Living Water, and the Renewal of the Earth. The audio from this session will be available for purchase at sunstone.org after the symposium. The video recording of this session will be available in the Whova app for approximately 3 months, beginning at the end of August 2020. If you have any questions for our panelists, please type your questions into the Whova app, and they will be addressed during the question and answer period at the end of their presentation. At Sunstone, we are making it a goal to build a community that allows many ways for people to express their faith. Our tagline is, "There is more than one way to Mormon." We invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. Living trees and living waters stand at the heart of spiritual traditions around the world. As potent symbols of sustainability and vitality, can these images help us construct a vision of Zion and a renewed earth? The shadow of the Anthropocene hangs over all of us as the threat of climate change grows each year. Can the living truths of the divine feminine and the words of Christ help us transform our relationship with each other and the earth? Join us as Kathryn Knight Sonntag and Bob Rees share and discuss how Heavenly Mother and the gospel of love could change the fate of the earth. Let me introduce each of our speakers before we begin. Madison Daniels, who will be moderating this discussion, is the faith and community organizer for the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. He co-founded the blog Bristlecone Firesides with the mission of regrounding the Mormon tradition in the stuff of the earth. Bob Rees is a visiting professor and director of Mormon Studies at Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. He is the author or editor of numerous studies, including the forthcoming second volume of Why I Stay, The Challenges of Discipleship for Contemporary Mormons, and A New Witness to the World, Reading and Rereading the Book of Mormon, forthcoming from BBC Press. Kathryn Knight Sonntag received a Master of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning from Utah State University and works as a land planner and writer in Salt Lake City. Her passion for writing about the transcendent in the land began as a child and continues to shape her writing, including her first collection of poetry, The Tree at the Center, from BBC Press in 2019. I'll now give the floor to our presenters.
Well, it looks like Patricia was able to join us last second.
Oh, well, that is excellent. So let me introduce Patricia. Can you give us your last name's pronunciation, please?
Karamesines.
Karamesines.
Karamesines, yes.
Thank you. Patricia Karamesines is a poet, essayist, and novelist with an intense interest in human language. She is the author of the mystery novel, The Pictograph Murders, from Signature Books in 2004. Her poetry appears in the anthology of LDS poets from Harvest Signature Books 1989, in the anthology Fire in the Pasture from Peculiar Pages, 2011, and has also been published in Dialogue and Iriantum. Her autobiographical essay, Death of an Old Dog, won first place in Sunstone Magazine's 2015 Eugene England Memorial Personal Essay Contest. She won many other awards for her writing, including the crown competition of Brigham Young University's Eistesvod Lyrical Poetry Contest, 2 awards from the Utah Original Writers Competition, and the University of Arizona's Poetry Center Competition. She is the founding editor of BYU's student literary journal, Inscape, and runs the nature writing blog Wilderness Interface Zone, advancing the greening of human language, especially as it relates to interacting with and advocating for nature. She is completing her first book of verse titled Meditations on Chaos, Poems for a Planet That Wants to Fall Apart, and a creative nonfiction work, Showdown at Crossfire Canyon, at the interface of language and landscape. Currently, she works at Utah State University's Blanding campus as the Academic Success Center's tutoring supervisor, helping to set up the campus's fledgling tutoring program and assist budding scholars in developing their academic writing skills. Her students include residents of the small towns of Blanding, Monticello, and Bluff, and students from indigenous communities located throughout the Four Corners region. Okay, Madison, take it away.
Here we are. So we've already kind of had our intros, but I know everyone has written a kind of an intro idea piece, and we were going to start with Bob so that we can kind of set the stage for the discussion that we're going to follow, and then Patricia, you'll go after Bob, all right? Excellent. Bob, take it away.
In keeping with this year's theme in Sunstone, the symposium, I begin with a story of grief. In his essay, The Passing Wisdom of Birds, the American naturalist Barry Lopez tells of the time when Hernando Cortez and hundreds of Spanish soldiers marched into Mexico City on November 8th, 1519. That city, known as Tenochtitlan, was known as the most beautiful city in the world. Some people referred to it as the New World Byzantium. What astonished the Spaniards, says Lopez, was the depth and pervasiveness of its abundant gardens and aviaries filled with thousands of birds. And throughout the city, wild birds nested everywhere. The Europeans, full of arrogance, greed, and disrespect, were driven from the city by the Aztec leader Montezuma. In what would become a pattern of European conquest, a year later, Cortez returned and laid siege to the city, and in an ultimate act of violence, as Lopez says, in a move calculated to humiliate and frighten the Mexican people, Cortez set fire to the aviaries. Lopez comments, the grotesqueness and unmitigated violence of Cortez' act has come back to me repeatedly in reading of early European encounters with the landscapes of the New World, like a kind of darkness. The image I've carried of Cortez setting fire to the aviaries is an image I cannot rid myself of. It stands in my mind for a fundamental lapse of wisdom in the European conquest of America, an underlying trouble in which political conquest, personal greed, revenge, and national pride outweigh what is innocent, beautiful, serene, and defenseless, the birds. The destruction of the birds, which in world cultures represents gods, angels, spirituality, and the human soul itself, symbolizes the self-destructive side of human nature, one that today, including in the Mormon heartland, threatens not only the natural world, but humanity itself. Lopez writes, in such a moment, pausing to take flight, taking the flight of a flock of birds passing through sunshine and banking gracefully into a grove of trees, it is possible to move beyond a moment in the Valley of Mexico when we behaved as though we were insane, which frankly in relation to the earth is how we are still behaving. We are behaving as though we were insane, and unless we change, there will come a time when the birds will have the earth and the heavens all to themselves, free of our indifference, devastation, and destruction. A number of years ago, I traveled in China with Lopez and a group of distinguished American writers, including the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Gary Snyder. On the day we visited the Great Wall, Snyder pointed to enormous erosion of the landscape and said that thousands of years ago, the land was covered by forests, but the Chinese cut them all down to build cities and the Great Wall itself. In his essay, Good, Wild, Sacred, Snyder writes eloquently about this beautiful little planet which has been entrusted to us. He says, this one small blue-green planet is the only one with comfortable temperatures, good air and water, and a wealth of living beings for millions or quadrillions of miles. It is a little water hole in the vast space, a nesting place, a place of singing and practice, a place of dreaming, yet it is on the verge of being totally destroyed. For the past 60 days, he says, my wife and I have been watching and listening to an amazing array of wisdom lectures called Humanity Rising. No, that's me saying that, excuse me. I'll go back, make that segue. So the past 60 days, my wife, Gloria, and I have been watching and listening to an amazing array of wisdom lectures called Humanity Rising, many of which center on our care of nature, the earth, and thus ultimately of ourselves. Here are a few expressions to guide our imagination and action that can turn us from grieving into gratitude. Quote, we stand on the threshold of the most critical decade in human history. Never before has humanity stood on such a precipice of extinction. Vision without action is a dream. Action without vision is a nightmare. If we don't just live in the universe, it lives in us. And eco over ego. Something created out of love, that is the earth, must itself be loved. We sing a hymn in church for the beauty of the earth with the following lines. For the beauty of the earth, for the beauty of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our joyful hymns of praise. Robinson Jeffers says, and we know that the enormous and vulnerable beauty of things is the face of God. Is it not by his high superfluousness we know our God? For to equal a need is natural, animal, mineral, but to fling rainbows over the rain and beauty above the moon and secret rainbows on the domes of deep sea shells, not even the weeds to multiply without blossom, nor the birds without music. Look how beautiful are all the things that he does. His signature is the beauty of things. God calls us, Mother Earth calls us to make our signature the preservation of such a beauty. For the love which from our birth over and around us lies, there's just one question. In relation to the earth, what is the most loving thing that we can do? That is the question that I hope we can respond to in this Sunstone Symposium. I hope it is the question that all of us might ask at this critical junction in the history of the world and in our history. What is the most loving thing I can do?
Thank you, Bob. That was really great. I loved it. Am I echoing? I'm echoing. It's okay. Excellent. Patricia, do you want to read yours next?
Yes. Am I audible? Okay. Besides the bounding main surrounding us, the universe, and the living sensitive skin of the planet beneath our feet, another realm has mushroomed from humble starts to become a new habitat. For many of us, it too is a place of refuge or wilderness we seek out for relief, vision, and discovery of potential. It also contains the stuff of world building, a discrete combinatorial system reflective of that of DNA. In this realm, we may abruptly find ourselves at the edges of cliffs that open views onto expansive landscapes. When we encounter them, this region's slants of light, deep sunlit pools, and numinous passageways can in an instant change everything. At this stage of human progress, it's nearly unexplored country. In its terrain, we're young and unaware. Though many of us think we know everything about it, there is to know. Scholars and scientists focusing attention on it acknowledge it as a hotbed of evolutionary brio for our species. This newly erupted, overlooked domain, the environment of human language. Common behavior in language includes using words as tools, instruments we handle to secure what we need to survive. But after we club the rabbit, skewer the enemy, build the wall, repair the toilet, replace the alternator, leave the drive-up window with value meal in hand, we set the tool down because tools are only handy when they help complete tasks they're designed for. In the tool view of language, words are objects you can pick up and put down, utensils you use to secure any advantage you could think of. Communicating in language is fraught with risk. Problems in need of solving abound on every side, including those we bring to the supposedly still life of a text. The enduring popularity of the tool take on communication seems to have visceral appeal, maybe because it gives the impression of control over such problems, and control has the comely face of risk reduction. In his book, The Language Animal, Charles Taylor argues the instrumental theory of human language is an older way of engaging with experience that not only persists in modern attitudes about the value of language, but that dominates it. The instrumental view reinforces our sense that we can describe things or experiences so that the ideas of those things or experiences can be communicated to others. Language's handiness makes it possible for us to grasp with the mind, to know, which faces us toward the notion of certainty. For this reason alone, it requires constant critical attention. Why? Because to clear the way for unethical practices, instrumental language is often ginned up as the first step in exploitation of human and natural resources. But wait. Beside the quality of that linguistic toolbox we haul out to change the world and the ethical degrees of skill with which we use it, there's yet another reason for greening up our powers of speech. Language has deeper dimensions wherein we can do so much more than we can with just a well-equipped linguistic toolbox. According to Charles Taylor, the information coding view of language, or the instrumental view, tends to see language providing immensely useful instruments for defining and communicating knowledge about the world. But language creates a context for human life and action. We relate to this context not only or even primarily as to an instrument which we can pick up or lay down. Rather, it is the medium we are in, a feature of what we are. It opens up for us other dimensions of existence. Taylor calls this second linguistic realm the constitutive realm. He says it's a more energized nerve center of creativity and innovation than the tool take on language has power to get a handle on. In fact, figuring out how to open into its deeper dimensions requires admitting the limits of the dominant instrumental model and its focus on control and closure. One of constitutive language's key catalysts, figurative language, that embraces risk as it activates discovery and leaps into the open range of infinite potential. In this way, as a current we are in, and that can directly affect our quality of life, human language is itself an environment in need of critical focus. So it may be as detrimental to all life on the planet to act carelessly in the environment of human expression as it is to behave carelessly in the physical environment. Like our life-sustaining waterways and the character of the air we breathe, language's currents open or operate on a downstream principle. The quality of material released into language's tributaries affects quality of life for those downstream of the word flow. But in either the instrumental or constitutive linguistic realms, the quality of our connectivity to each other and to Earth depends on the quality of how we phrase ourselves and each other and the ways in which we phrase this planet we live on. If we wish to defend and invigorate Earth, we must do so by engaging in the best possible language. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Patricia. Bob, Patricia, you guys did an excellent job kind of setting the stage for us, talking about, so what, what's up on the slide right now is the intro to the Anthropocene. And so the Anthropocene is literally, it's the age of man. It's the geological era of human beings where rather than, environmental forces being the most dominant impact on the planet, human beings have become the most dominant impact on the planet. And we see this through climate change, through ocean acidification, through the, the sixth great extinction that's going on right now. So what this problem of the Anthropocene is it's so big, so large, and we need to figure out a new way to think, a new way to envision ourselves in order to combat it. I want to open with a quote from Roy Scranton from his book, Learning to Die in the Anthropocene, which is less depressing than it sounds. He says, in order for us to adapt to this strange new world, we're going to need more than scientific reports and military policy. We're going to need new ideas. We're going to need new myths and new stories and new vision. So let's start by talking about a vision of Zion. That one of the core ideas of Mormonism is this idea of building Zion. So my first question for you guys is, what is it that new myths and new stories and new visions can give us in this quest to build Zion?
Well, let me begin by saying that the symbolism and the imagery associated with Zion is both very ancient and in the Latter-day Saint tradition quite new. That is, Latter-day Saints speak of Zion, both in terms of its ancient and its ideal place within the imagination. And I think if one takes literally what Latter-day Saints believe, it is that their restoration includes the restoration of all things. And that means all of the things that go back to the beginning of the earth, all of the things that go back to ancient mythology, and all of the things that might be considered newly or revealed again. And so I think that in a way, William Carlos Williams says that the imagination knows all stories before they are told. And we are in a place in the history of the earth where we have to imagine a story that is different from the one we've been living for the past several centuries. And if the idea of Zion is to be realized, which is a kind of heaven on earth, then with our imagination, we have to start thinking of how we can use the imagination to change our behavior, because at present we are headed for the precipice of destruction. That's not an accurate idea, as I said in my beginning. When I was preparing a course for UC Berkeley 5 years ago, I attended an international conference in which we were told we had 5 years to get to the place where the earth might be changed, where the fulcrum might start swinging back. We are now being told we have another decade, but many people don't believe that we do have that much time. So what I think we have to do is reimagine what that vision of Zion is in relation to ourselves and the earth, and create these, not only these new stories, but these new visions of how we're to behave.
Thank you. Kathryn, you got any thoughts?
I've been thinking a lot about healing interpersonal and intergenerational healing. And I love this quote from Braiding Sweetgrass, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Madison. But the author, Robin Wall Kimmerer, says, "Action on behalf of life transforms. Because the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal, it is not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us." I think we need a new vision of Zion that includes the earth as a living, breathing, embodied soul, in a way that informs our daily actions and vision, and that we really believe and act in a way that supports this theology, this very unique theology that we have, that the earth will be our celestial home if we merit it. And so engaging in this sort of work to heal the earth heals us and heals generations of souls that have passed. And I think that for me has been a very key part of re-envisioning Zion.
Thank you. Patricia?
I think one thing we have to do is tap into deeper groundwaters of creativity. David Deutsch says, he's a British physicist, he says in The Beginning of Infinity, that creativity is the capacity to create new explanations. And I think that this plays into what I hear people saying about drawing deeply upon the imagination to create new narratives, new compasses for moving toward a better place than where we are now. I also think it's still entirely possible for us to, I think there's still enough good in the world and in many, many people for us to build off of that, move out from that into new areas, new territories, new realms of relationship and expression and physical endeavor.
Yeah, no, and especially given the context of what we're going to, of what comes later in the presentation or in the panel, is this idea of older stories, older myths, and older visions understood in new ways, imagined in new ways, and engaged with fresh eyes and fresh language. So building Zion is a core aspect of kind of the Mormon idea. And as Bob mentioned, that part of the idea of building Zion is it's a restoration of all things. And so my question is, specifically that goes along with that is the renewal of the earth, that the earth will receive its paradisiacal glory. So what is it about Zion that goes hand in hand with the renewal of the earth?
Well, again, I think that you, maybe the best way to think of this is that Zion is something that is both internal and external. The external Zion cannot be realized without an internal Zion, without a Zion of the heart. And so part of that is to see that relationship between, and that relationship between us and the earth, between the inner and outer, between our, us, the feelings of our heart and the way we behave in the world. And I think very often there is a disconnect from those that, and even there are people who attend to what might be seen as the inner landscape, but take no thought of the outer landscape in which life must be lived. And there are people who do the opposite. Everything is maybe attending to saving the earth, but not attending to the inner landscape. So I would say that harmonizing those two, which is ultimately what, again, I think Zion is. Zion ultimately happens because love finally finally becomes the most important principle and action and expression in the world. That we love, that those great commandments, to love God. And it seems to me that to love God means to, I've got to get some electricity here going. To love God means to love the earth. It means to love ourselves. It means to love others. And since the earth is God's creation, we cannot hope to love God without loving God's creation.
Thank you. Any other thoughts for Kathryn, Patricia, before we move on? All righty. Okay. In the interest of time, we'll
my book of poetry.
Patricia, let me ask, what is the importance of language in this work? That Bob kind of talked about, that there needs to be a harmony between the inner and outer world. And I know we're going to end up talking about some, big ideas, some mythic kind of visionary ideas. And what is the importance of language in distilling these ideas to make action in the world? I don't think we can hear you. You're muted.
Okay,
there we go.
Now?
We can hear you.
I also have the wrong name here, so this is sort of a under my name. I'm seeing Kathryn's name. I mean, under my picture on the screen.
It's in the bedroom. There's a whole stack of them on your bookcase, on my bookcase.
Or oops, there's 3 dots on your little thing that you could change it if you want. We use, me and you both use
I'll
Kathryn's
worry
link.
about that later.
Okay. So Patricia, the role of language in helping distill these ideas so we can make action in the world.
It's central. In some ways, I don't know, it's hard for me to imagine Zion and restoration of the world. I'm not sure what that paradigm would look like. It would seem to me to be beyond general human experience at this point. So it's difficult for me to point at something and say, yeah, in our language, we have to get from here to there. Okay. So for me, the first steps that we need to take in putting into play any scenario to give ourselves the authority to in language, excuse me, the first steps we need to take will be in putting into play language that will build toward or move toward or help us emerge toward the release of the blessing, so to speak. Okay. The problem with most of language, or most of human history, though, is that the first steps that people take in language has been to arbitrarily enforce the whims of authoritarian self-interest. And this is what I call the animal mean, which I will address later. But to prepare for better world conditions on any level, we must move the language off the animal mean, the drive to cement self-interest, and into the Sermon on the Mount realm of language that opens into other realms of being. Work needed on either the language level or the physical shoulder to the wheel level will have to be intense work, very difficult, very focused, very involved, both at the level of putting problems into language to see them better and at the level of work that must be done to solve the problems. But the foundational material that we use for any good moves we make will be in language. Either language that, for instance, the Sermon on the Mount, I think, is an excellent example, or language that we figure out how to move toward from where we are now.
Excellent. So at the beginning, Kathryn, when we were doing kind of our pre-conversation, we all kind of coalesced around this idea that that an aspect of the new vision, the new myth, right, that we need to discover or recover, I guess, is this idea of the living trees of the divine feminine of Heavenly Mother and her connection to the earth. So let's move into this section of the conversation. Why is the divine feminine so relevant and necessary? Or actually, you know what? We'll go back and then we'll let you read your piece that you prepared, and then we'll move into these questions.
Okay. And just to preface, so I'm reading excerpts from an essay that I published with Bristlecone Firesides. It's called Goddess of the Mountain and Goddess of the Cloud. And we'll be talking a little bit later about the symbolism of the divine feminine, specifically as a tree, the tree of life. The tree of life is also a representation of the axis mundi. And so I just want to briefly talk about that before this essay to introduce the idea. The axis mundi has been used throughout time and space to orient a people or a religion or a culture in time and space. So it's a vertical marking of the center of the cosmos. And from that point, the cardinal directions spread out. So it's sort of a psychological, a mental, and a cosmological centering and organization of the temporal sphere, but then also the underworld and the heavens. So this connecting force between what is temporal, what is here on the earth, the sky above, and the underworld below. Mountains are also a symbol of the axis mundi, and this piece I'm going to read is using a mountain as this sort of centralizing force. Sacred texts invite readers to ascend the mountain. Nephi and Moses describe being caught up into an exceedingly high mountain and seeing the Lord. John writes that an angel carried him away in the spirit to a great and high mountain. The ensuing theophanies include visions of creation, why and how all things came to be. The prophets stare into the heart of God and find wisdom, capital W, there waiting. What, or rather who, is wisdom? Many of the cathedrals of the Orthodox Christian world are dedicated to the Holy Wisdom. In their icons, she is a fiery angel, crowned and enthroned, surrounded by rings of light with the earth beneath her feet. Proverbs reveals wisdom assisting the Creator as the world is formed. When he established the heaven, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, I was beside him, the woman who holds all things together. Once the world is formed, wisdom forges the celestial order. Anciently, wisdom held the secrets of harmony and wholeness that connected all in love and compassion. She was the bonds of the covenant of peace, the everlasting covenant. In the book of Enoch, just before the first temple of Jerusalem is destroyed at the end of the 7th century BCE, wisdom is rejected by the priests. Their spiritual eyes are closed, and iniquity replaces her. The main purpose of the temple liturgies was to maintain the everlasting covenant of the Creator with all of creation. Worshippers learned of this connection between heaven and earth through right teaching. With the exile of wisdom from the temple, though, the knowledge and language of the power of this highest order of priestesshood and priesthood were corrupted and lost. For the ancient Israelites, losing wisdom meant the unraveling of creation, human society, and individual lives, the breaking of the covenant of peace. She became a victim to the idea that humankind owns knowledge. Margaret Barker says, the state of the creation and knowledge about the creation were closely linked. When one was fragmented and separated from God, so was the other. Understanding her continued loss to the world makes sense of the difficulty we in religious communities have with establishing a credible theology for the environment, one that can truly call on the kind of power that can change our course. We have lost the vision of wisdom. My need for language, ancient and new, with the power to bind us to creation before it is too late, propels my search for exiled wisdom. The temple script of my LDS tradition is as fractured as our collective ability to talk about the creation in a way that can save it, to allow wisdom to walk with us toward the face of God. I miss my mother tongue. I search for fragments of it in scripture, in my heart, and in the temple of the mountain. I feel the void of divine feminine power and wisdom's endowment that integrates scientific knowledge and theological knowledge, since we have falsely claimed that creation and human society run as separate systems.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, so let's proceed with this question then. Why is the divine feminine so relevant and necessary today, especially when we're considering the idea of building Zion and of restoring the earth?
So if I could continue, I've found in studying the ancient Israelite ceremonies and their understanding of the role of the divine feminine, or we could just call it the feminine aspect of deity in the temple, that we have really missed a whole expression and understanding of love and of connection to the earth and to God. And that this is really paramount in coming to a fuller understanding of the purpose of the restoration and the purpose of our own ascension journeys. Having the divine feminine, called Asherah by the ancient Israelites, that was her form to them, in the Holy of Holies of the temple, really solidified this for me, that in that space, in that holy space where the highest priesthood operates, is where we find her, and is where we find the mysteries of creation. And so understanding who she is, who she was, and her connection to the Father and to the Son, I think has really helped a lot of saints understand that there's a sort of urtext of women that needs to be discovered, and that women need to sort of champion this discovery of the female archetype and the word that she embodied, capital W, as Christ also was the word embodied. And of course, everyone is invited in that journey, however they identify. But I think women do need to lead out on this sort of rediscovery of the feminine language that really, as the covenant of peace says, is that binding force, that power that can seal us to creation, all of creation, now and forever.
Excellent. Bob, Patricia, you got anything to add?
I would say that the reason why the divine feminine is so necessary and relevant today is that the human masculine has so categorically failed, and by neglecting the feminine, by sublimating the feminine, by ignoring the feminine, and by exalting the human masculine, we are in the place we are today. And it would seem to me that as I think Thoreau said, in the nature is the preservation of the world, I think we are at a point where the feminine is the salvation of the world, simply because we see so much of the failure that we have done. What we have done to the earth is sacrilegious.
Yes. So I know we talked briefly about, and I might combine a couple questions here, but at the beginning, Kathryn, you mentioned why it's so important that we personify both the feminine and the earth. And I think that, you know, we live in this age of objectification, of commodification, and the language is how we think about and how we interact with the earth in a lot of ways. And so I guess, why is it so important that we develop a language of personification, of subjectification for the earth?
I think it goes hand in hand with becoming awake to patriarchy and the way that it infiltrates everything. That even the way that we understand and see and identify what a mother is, you know, we talk about the earth as the Mother Earth. What does that mean? And why, you know, like there are all of these sort of, I think it was in the late 80s when the Love Your Mother campaign was really big, and there was the picture of the earth from far away on t-shirts and posters, and then Love Your Mother across the top. And that was a problematic slogan, you know, because we have a lot of ambivalence towards our own mothers, towards motherhood, towards the feminine. Like understanding a mother, the definition of mother within the constructs of patriarchy is troubling and problematic. So it takes a lot of personal work and introspection to remove yourself, become aware of the ways in which patriarchy has shaped your ideas of what a woman is, what her language is, what it should be, what it shouldn't be, what she should look like, what she should do, whether she's an appendage to the larger system run mostly by men or sovereign. And that is a work that we all have to do individually, and collectively we have to be accountable for that. And so I think we have to really begin to understand that perhaps our ideas of mothers and motherhood, that we have some discord there, that perhaps loving the earth feels difficult because we have our own difficulty with the feminine, and understand how to sort of address that.
Patricia, you got any thoughts?
Yes, as I was listening to this and the word objectification came up, what popped into my head was Martin Buber's I and thou, and the two primary words that he discusses, the I, thou, I or I, you, primary word, which is the deeper relationship of mutual engagement. And then there is the more common, and to connect it with Charles Taylor, instrumental level of language, which is I, it, which is where a person arranges the world in terms of how they can use it, how they can form it into a self-supporting system. Other people are basically pieces of furniture that they can move around in their mental space to make themselves comfortable, and so on and so forth. So he extended that beyond just engagement between people to between a person and God, the I-thou relationship between a person and their God, and that mutual engagement that just you form each other as you're in it. It could be compared to, for instance, the niche construction in biology, where the species and its environment enter into a feedback loop where they change each other. Anyway, for Buber, it was more straightforward. I mean, as you engage in the I-thou spoken level of engagement and acted level of engagement, you enter more deeply into the divine.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think this is a good way to kind of segue into the next section, which is where we're talking about living waters, or the Sermon on the Mount. That, you know, especially when we think about this I-thou relationship, like that's part of what's at the core of Jesus's teachings. And Kathryn, you'd mentioned that, you know, the Word became flesh and that the Word became Jesus. And in Franciscan theology, the first feminine incarnation was the universe itself. So within Franciscan theology, the universe is a feminine incarnation, and then Jesus is the second incarnation. And I'm struck by a lot of the paintings that came out of the Renaissance era, which are these the Pieta, or the Madonna with Child, which is kind of here. Let me skip through these. You know, Mary as this symbol of the feminine aspects of the divine in the universe, that then offers forward the Christ child, right? And Jesus. And the fruits of the tree within Mormon cosmology, the fruits of the tree of life is the pure love of Christ. Wait, what did I say that? The fruits of the tree of life are is the pure love of Christ. So as we move in this section talking about living waters and the Sermon on the Mount, I think that's an interesting way to begin thinking about this. Patricia or Bob, we in our pre-conversation, we kind of talked about how the Sermon on the Mount is actually a fairly subversive teaching. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll let Bob go first.
Well, Walter Wink has written a very interesting essay on the subversiveness of the Sermon on the Mount and of Jesus' teaching, in which it seems like he is being rather passive, but in fact what he's doing is exposing hypocrisy through his action. I think the Sermon on the Mount, which is one of the great poems about human behavior, one of the great testaments, has so much richness in it that applies to the subject we're talking about. But nothing, it seems to me, more important than the golden rule, which is part of Jesus' teaching. It really means that we love others as if we were the others, that we are willing to love the earth as it was given to us as a great gift, and that one of the ways we love ourselves is by loving the earth. And what we're doing to the earth shows not only a disregard of love for the earth, but ultimately a disregard of love for ourselves. But ultimately, that ethic, which is found, the golden rule is found in every major religion, it seems to me, leaves all of us in a place where we fall short of that, because all of us make decisions that are based not on that larger, grander, deeper spirituality, but on a narrower one.
Okay, I see the Sermon on the Mount a little bit differently. For me, it's not a equal sign straight across reciprocity. It's more Jesus asking us to do better than we might wish others to do for ourselves if we were in that position. So we give back not just the coat that we're sued for, but we give the cloak also. We give more. Every one of those admonitions seems to push us into the realm of what I call overproduction. And given some of my own personal experiences, I've had to apply overproduction in my own life in order to solve some of the very serious problems in my family's life. But just on a basic level, say for instance, if we take the example of world hunger or starvation. If you remember, and I'm going to be a little wry here, but in the 1968 disaster thriller, The Population Bomb, Stanford University professor Paul Ehrlich predicted worldwide famine would befall humanity by the 1970s and 80s. Now, and that stirred everybody up, but one of the outcomes of that was that this small town farmer named Norman Borlaug created a semi-dwarf, high-yield, disease-resistant wheat variety, well, actually multiple varieties, that solved the problem of an impending world hunger or world starvation crisis. So he came up with a wheat variety that was far more productive than any that had been on the earth before. And so just on the general level of how we solve some of these problems, rising seas, intense heat, we need to bring in that creativity again. In this case, in order to overproduce to meet the needs that are going to arise. Now, if I could, I would like to talk about this on a personal level as well. My middle child, Matea, was born with severe brain injuries that occurred in utero from, guess what? A virus called cytomegalovirus, which I hadn't heard of, and most people that I mentioned the name to also have not heard of. But here we go. Guess what day she was born on? She was born on Earth Day. Okay? She was born on Earth Day with terrible damage done to both of the backs of her cerebral hemispheres, plus her brain stem. They were horribly savaged by this virus. This happened, she's 28 now. So 28 years ago, I was already confronted with the terrible damage that viruses can do in the world, which was a major wake-up call to me. Now, the doctor said, don't even try to help her. Nothing can be done. They said, if you try, it will destroy your family, because 90-something, 95, 97% of families where they try to help a child suffering from what's called such a severe insult, that's the word that they used, an insult to the brain, end up under so much stress they blow apart. They also said she's unlikely to live very long. So that's what my authority figure said, don't try. What I started doing without any idea at all, whether it was going to pay off, so to speak, or go anywhere at all, was I started sleeping with her under my arm at night. And during her naps, I had her with me all the time. Now at the time, in those early days, she was suffering constant petit mal seizures, and she was probably suffering cortical blindness, and I would imagine she had headaches. Nobody really knows how much suffering she was enduring. She certainly had sensory processing disorder, which threw her into fits of terror. She would scream for days at a time at sensory overstimulation, which could come from any direction. So I slept with her under my arm. I treated those things as real. If she reacted in that way, I didn't say, oh, come on, get over it. I took her out of the area that was causing a problem, and I treated those things as real. I wore her in a sling all the time, or set her in a car seat next to me. Now, again, I had no idea what was going to happen, but the idea that I was putting forward here, that I was acting on, is that she probably, if she could make a choice, then I need to give her something to come out towards, something to orient to. So I devoted tremendous amounts of time to helping her unravel her knots of terror. And I gave her every opportunity to come out of the darkness toward me. I didn't know if any of this was ever going to work. There was no map. The doctors were saying there wasn't any. My husband and I brainstormed constantly about how to solve all of her problems. They were endless. But she finally began to stabilize around 6 years old. She finally started to come out of her cave-in, out of that darkness, and respond to me. She still couldn't look at me. It was still too overstimulating. But this is the kind of overproductiveness I'm talking about. The world itself, my doctors were incapable of even putting this kind of action into language, or this kind of plan into language. I had to develop it myself. And it involved doing everything bigger and more. One of the end results is that she's still alive at 28. She's still total care, but she has been an atrium onto the cosmos for me. So that's another way that we're talking about this. Now, I see this not so much as subversiveness. I wasn't subverting my authority figures here. I thought of it as finding a workaround, or a kind of engaging in a kind of generosity. And I don't mean that to sound like a self-elevating phrase, but just overproductiveness to meet what I saw was the tremendous need this child had. And generosity by itself pushes the boundaries of what's possible. So 3, 4, 5, 6 years into this, her doctor started saying to me, not don't try, but whatever it is you're doing, keep doing it. Okay. So this is the kind, to me, this is the kind of effort we have to mount in the world right now towards the earth, towards each other, to meet the extreme degrees of need. And that expansiveness of soul, it kind of comes from being able to not get stuck in a particular narrative. Okay. For instance, the one the doctor said, which basically drew a line in the sand. They tried to draw a line in the sand. Don't try or it'll destroy your family. Okay. So there we go. That's, to me, this is what the kind of thing that, this is what I bring to the Sermon on the Mount. This kind of coat and cloak, what I call recklessness of mind.
Thank you, Patricia. Bob, Kathryn, any thoughts?
I was just thinking about, well, a couple of things about the body of Christ and how the sort of giving that he gave, I think, defies description in terms of going above and beyond in every moment that he was asked to heal, and that he was asked to give, and that he was asked to raise someone from the dead. I don't know that we have really any conception of what that was for him and what he gave, other than it was everything, that he didn't hold back anything. And I see that in the earth. I see that in the cycles and the regeneration and the natural processes of the earth, that it's all about life and giving, and that there's nothing in the natural world that holds back. And I think there's so much to learn from that. And I think embodiment is a huge aspect, I guess, of our theology that is yet to be explored. And I think it's largely because of our disconnect from the feminine, because women really are that tree. They are that actual vessel that connects heaven and earth through the process of creating and birthing life. And finding more language from women and from those who, you know, are willing to explore this realm about what that means, I think is really paramount to also understanding Christ and understanding what he meant in the Sermon of the Mount exactly. And a lot of people refer to the Sermon of the Mount as actual temple liturgy, as temple script. And I think that also gives us a lot to think about in terms of what does ascension look like? If we go through our modern LDS temple traditional texts, like, where is it taking us? It's leading us through the veil into a celestial realm. And if the Sermon on the Mount is supposed to also be a temple text, where is it leading us? How can we now, not in the next life, but now, move through those stages and through that ascension? And how can we not utilize, I don't like that word. How can we embody these powers through words, right? Through the sort of resurrection of an ancient but continuous language about life, death, life cycles, and how Christ understands life and death and life, to really connect us on a deeper level. I think there's got to be so much work done within our faith to really learn how to mourn with those who mourn. And I think Patricia is an incredible example of someone who has been willing to do that in an incredibly poignant way. I think if we're willing to go there with strangers or those we don't know very well in our own neighborhoods and our wards, that speaks volumes for our understanding of the Sermon on the Mount.
I think that one of the things that we don't often talk about is the influence that Mary had on the Sermon on the Mount. We think about all of those years that Jesus learned from her, the kindness, the giving to the poor, all of these things that he learned from her. And the other thing we don't think about is, you know, Jesus said he's done nothing that he hadn't seen the Father do. I think we might also, in a more expansive, enlightened understanding, think that Jesus didn't do anything that he didn't see his mother, his heavenly mother, do. And that the lessons that he learned, so much of Jesus' theology is oriented toward the feminine and the mixture and the balance of the feminine and the masculine. And I think that that idea of Heavenly Mother as constant tutor and all of those lessons that he learned at his mother's knees. When they went to market, she would give Jesus a coin and say, give us to the beggar woman. Or she would buy 2 loaves of bread and say, you know, when they got home, give this to our neighbor. All of those little lessons that Mary as mother taught to Jesus, we see flowering in these great radical teachings of his. And I think we don't think enough about how the feminine is part of who he is, and think about how we can make that. If we, at some point in the history of our church and our religion, we will understand more about Heavenly Mother, who is co-equal with the Father in her creativity, in her love, in her compassion, in her mercy. And I think it will help us doing that, to think about how we treat the earth as our mother, because we still depend on the earth as mother to feed us and nurture us and protect us. And I think that part of our theology has to expand to become more like what it has to be.
Thank you. You know, I want to make sure that you guys have your time to be able to read your closing thoughts. So let me ask, how do we begin to live this vision into the world, to begin the work of renewing the earth, specifically, you know, with the living trees and living waters? How do we begin to leverage these ideas in order to make the world renewed?
I would say that one of the ways is to keep in mind that as you look at world religion and world mythology and iconography and symbolism, the tree, the living tree and the living water combine into a harmonization that that is uniting. And I think asking that question, specific actions, I think of the Jewish imperative tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. And the idea is that everyone is called to do that. No one is excused from the responsibility of trying to repair the world. And the idea behind it is that you may not succeed in accomplishing all that you see to be done, but neither are you excused or forgiven, excused from trying. That is, we must try in whatever realm we can to repair the earth, to save the earth. So small things and large things, there is much to be done, and there is something that everyone can do, and everyone is capable of doing something out of love.
Okay, I'll go next. I came up with 4 things. The first is to seek well springs of the best language. Whether you believe that human language was a gift given us by the Creator, or it has evolved from humbler starts, that is to say, animal expression, we can tap deeper, go deeper, and find more water, deeper water, better water. Where language is Creator's gift, it entered the world from the sacred source and became a sustaining element in the world. And the Sermon on the Mount kind of points that up in ways that I wish people paid more attention to than they do. Witness his invoking us, or calling us to rise above mere territorial displays and self-defensiveness, or what I call the animal mean, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, to increase the word's fertile touch in the world. Witness what he says. Ye have heard that it hath been said, but I say. Okay? So he puts these things into language and releases that possibility into the world that we can go deeper, we can go higher, we can go further. If you just take the idea that language has arisen from the animal and human in attempts to adapt to the environment, that means it plays a vigorous role in our development. So you might wish to consider that human language may be on an increasingly meaningful trajectory. Okay? You may also wish to consider that this planet and the language that emerges in it through us, rather than being fallen, might actually be struggling to rise toward better realms of being. This is not, I don't see this as being in conflict with other creative language like the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, I see it as fitting right into the paradigms that Christ sets up for us there. Treating human language as a garden of potential for itself, with best emphasis on language of emergence and plenty, like that in the Sermon on the Mount, will help us resist the impulse to abandon the troubled beauty of this world for the airbrushed centerfold perfection of the next. The second thing I suggest is dropping the word versus deed dichotomy. A lot of people have this idea that words don't really tell the truth, it's the actions that will tell the truth. Now, this is something I don't have time to develop here. But I see it as a false dichotomy. Many of us grew up with that sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never break me. Charm to ward off the evil of schoolyard bullies and so forth. The adage has actually gone into free fall in its value, because now we've come to understand that words can break us. But what we haven't woken up to yet is the flip side. Words don't just break us, they can also make us. The third thing is to be the change, which we've all heard. Be the change you want to see in the world. So from my perspective, as somebody who's invested in language, while it's easy to call out other people as being wrong in their language, it's more valuable to consider our own relationship with the teeming linguistic environment and begin the change in the brain we have the most direct access to. Mindful speech is a good practice to begin to learn how to rewire your language for better effect in the world. Mindful speech practice helps develop increasing awareness of the quality of language we use, the quality of our words' veracity within the speaker's context, to the best of my knowledge, and the awareness of effects our words release into the world. Mindful speech opens up a pause between the intentions that someone else's language might have on us and our responses or reactions. So it interrupts the common hit-back impulse that often arises when another says something that causes harm, intentionally or unintentionally. We can learn to practice loving kindness mantras. And one of those that, well, we don't have time for that. But the fourth thing I have is to strive to create with language to reach coat and cloak facility that generates overproductiveness necessary to meet the depths of need in the world. Okay, people are hungry not just for nutritious food, and are thirsty not just for clean water. They're hungry for the touch of fine language.
Kathryn?
I think the most important thing for me over my lifetime has been solitude in nature, finding time to really be alone in the wild. And I think that's harder and harder as we are so busy and distracted and, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, like doesn't seem to be a priority probably at this moment in time, but that is where so much of the identities and the constructs that we find ourselves in a modern and a postmodern world fall away, and we're really faced with what is there, the real substance of our soul and our essence, and we have to find ourselves in that context of the wild and understand what it is. What is our relationship to, you know, to think about the questions of, is nature really separate at all from me? Or am I just an extension of this? Am I an extension of this mountain or this bird or this tree? And what does that mean? And understanding that there is a wild nature inside of all of us. There's a wild woman archetype that Clarissa Pinkola Estes talks about a lot in her work on mythology and archetypes. And that's an endangered species for many women. Understanding how to engage with the regenerative forces and the life, death, life forces inside of us, and what that looks like, how that cycles through us, how we are so connected to those powers, and learning to say that we're sacred and that all life is sacred in a way that really shapes our daily actions and our thoughts. We live in a world of consumption and just a crazy amount of consumption, and it's a distraction. It's a distraction from the reality of death, ultimately. Within the framework of consumption, there's this idea that something dies, something burns out, something gets worn down, you just get a new thing, you get a new whatever to replace what's lost. And we collectively and communally do not know how to deal with grief anymore. And it's trickling down into our individual capacity to deal with grief and loss. We need to find that time to be alone in wilderness and be at peace with the natural processes that we embody. And listening to women, reading as much as you can about what's going on in the earth, finding good, like Patricia says, like going for that language that that builds you, that builds your spirit, that builds your soul, that enlightens you, that rings true, that is substantiated, that increases your capacity for more and more knowledge. And holding your leaders accountable, holding their language accountable, I think is so paramount right now.
Thank you. So let's move in. I think Patricia might have already read through parts of hers, but Bob and Kathryn, your final thoughts? You're muted, Bob. There we go.
I began with a statement of grief, and would like to close with one of gratitude. The idea of this conversation between humans and living things, I think of a poem by Robert Frost, who imagines Eve, our first mother, as listening to and imitating bird song, and then imagines the birds hearing and imitating her song so that they blend together in a new song. He says, he would declare and could himself believe that the birds there in all the garden around, from having heard the day-long voice of Eve, had added to their own an oversound, her tone of meaning, but without the words, but admittedly an eloquence so soft could only have had an influence on birds when call or laughter carried it aloft. Be that as may be, she was in their song. Moreover, her voice upon their voices crossed had now persisted in the woods so long that probably it would never be lost. Never again would bird song be the same. And to do that to birds is why she came. Here's my poetic reflection on that scene, and my hope that we will listen especially to women, to Mother Earth and to our Heavenly Mother, to harmonize the music of the spheres, including the music of this, our earthly sphere. This is called Bird Song, Eve Song. On the way to Tennessee Beach, hearing a meadowlark singing, ringing through the reeds, I thought of Eve and wondered, did the poet get it right? Was she in their song, or were they in hers? Who sang first, and who first listened with wonder there in the marvelous garden? Perhaps neither, but both listened to the first singer himself, who sang melodies as he fashioned feathers and hummed tunes as he shaped tiny throats and tongues of the red-winged blackbird, the indigo bunting, the scarlet tanager, the nightingale, so that when they flew from his hands and swam in wind, they blazed into all the garden round, his singing, his songs. And when he shaped hers from moist clay, his hand delicately forming the slight hollow of her throat, making her voice different from all the birds and from Adam's voice as well. He breathed the breath of life into her voice, into her heart, and with it his own treasure trove of song, the music of stars and spheres, of suns and deep darkness of all creation, so he could hear back from her and all her daughters the notes of his singing, accompanied by all the birds, a rapture of praise ringing through the world.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bob. That's very well written. Kathryn?
Wisdom was the cloud of glory in the first Jerusalem temple, and the cloud that followed the tabernacle of Moses. She was the mist hovering over the face of the waters as they separated from the land. She is the great weaver of peace, love, and continuance. I find her in the promise kept, the heart broken in compassion, the tongue free of deception. I find her in the dance of elk and wolf, in the tree whose fruit opens my eyes, and the tree that keeps them open forever. Her robes drape the land. Her heart laments with love over every inch of life. We mourn our losses together. I know she is prophesied to return to a temple cleansed and consecrated by rituals of penitence and atonement. I know that returning wisdom to the Holy of Holies will heal the world with the knowledge of the angels. I feel a shift in the air and hear theological discourse again taking up the distinction between fragmented knowledge and the holy wisdom who joins all things together. How critical it is that our own LDS discourse contributes to this conversation through recounted stories of our own personal ascension journeys to commune with the goddess of the mountain, the goddess of the cloud. Joel 3 describes the mountain of the Lord as Zion. It makes sense to me that establishing Zion as Moses and Joseph Smith intended and as Enoch and his people actually did means entering into an order in which all come symbolically to the tops of the mountains to enter into a higher law, into the visions and mysteries of creation through the everlasting covenant, through the binding powers of wisdom. The ascension of the city of Enoch could not be stopped. The very earth under their feet left with them, as it too entered into wisdom's covenant. She is the veil parted, the signs given, our spiritual eyes open, our tongues loosed with the gift of prophecy. I await the return of wisdom and see many engaged in preparing a way for her to reestablish an order and peace that weaves together all knowledge and truth, so that Isaiah's words will finally come to pass. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. I imagine wisdom returned from exile, our inner landscapes unburdened by the blindness of mortality, and earth finally at rest. I envision a world anointed by her dew, her love, and hope quickens my heart.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right. Well, we have just like 5 minutes left. Are there any questions? Quick questions?
Yes, actually, we have a few questions from our for the panelists. However, I do need to warn you, we only have 6 minutes left, so you're gonna have to make your answers brief. I'm gonna blend a couple of these questions together as well. Some of our viewers have asked, I'm having some issue with the language. Could you provide a definition of masculine and feminine? I think my problem might be that everything seems to rely on these binaries or assumptions as to what they mean. I guess it's only natural that human beings would anthropomorphize God. But why do you think we continue to define aspects of God as either masculine or feminine?
That's a great question. I think my understanding, at least, of God has evolved to include a being that encompasses the whole spectrum from masculine to feminine, and that understanding of every individual the way that Christ understands every individual, having embodied each through the atonement, is very much a part of that conception of God for me now, that there, because of how society and the world largely has been set up and run, a lot of how we understand the world and language and culture is through the lens of the masculine. And there is a lot of negativity that surrounds that comprehension. And it doesn't mean that, of course, masculinity is a negative thing. It's not. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. There's a lot of issues around the way that it's been held up within society and sort of become toxic. And so you see that largely with hierarchical structures in different groups, different organizations, and sort of power being displayed in a way that is not healthy. And we see sort of the warning against this in DNC about priesthood power being used in a way that is only with compassion, with love, and not with overbearing or with ruling over someone or with any sort of dominance. And so I think when we're talking now in this conversation specifically about the earth and the balance that we need to strike, it is that we need to pull in the feminine aspects of harmony and connection and interconnection, and sort of the way that a feminine mind and language can contribute to healing the world. And so language obviously is so constrained when we talk about polarities, when we talk about what is uniquely feminine or uniquely masculine. I think there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of gray area, and that's part of the work that we're engaged in, is understanding, well, what really is femininity and how is it best manifest in the world, and what is masculinity really and how is it best manifest in the world. And so coming together and bringing our best to work out these sorts of issues, I think is paramount in healing the world and healing our own personal identities.
Any other questions?
Sure. If none of our other panelists are going to speak to that one, I do have a couple of statements here. I have written, one of our viewers has written, through Gina Colvin's A Thoughtful Faith podcast, I became aware of Gaia's Temple, a pagan goddess church located right in my backyard. In addition to my local ward, I've been attending Gaia's Temple for the past 3 years. We celebrate the divine feminine at our monthly Sunday services, as well as at our 8 seasonal holidays. The pagan tradition has maintained teachings, rituals, symbols, and practices of the divine feminine. Heavenly Mother is real, and I have encountered her through the pagan tradition. I think we have our work cut out for us in restoring the divine feminine in the church. The hard work, as I see it, is overcoming our conceptual bias. And I wonder if you could address some of the issues raised there as to how is it that the Mormon tradition can bring back the divine feminine and overcome our bias for patriarchy.
In 30 seconds, no. That's way too big a subject. I'm sorry that we're out of time, but wow, that's an enormous
Next year
thing to respond to. Yes.
Absolutely, yes. I guess we are out of time, but I hope and I want to encourage everybody to continue to engage on our forums on the Whova app. Our presenters, if you know how to get in there, you should be able to also respond to further questions. So hopefully that will help. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of the Sunstone Symposium. Thank you for attending and for supporting Sunstone.
Benjamin,
Yes.
Before you end, I want to give a little appeal here to the Bountiful Children's Foundation. The Bountiful Children's Foundation servicing children, LDS and other children in 20 countries, 200 congregations, feeding children who are malnourished. And we encourage any of those of you who feel inclined to reach out to such needy and worthy children to consider making a contribution. Thank you so much.
Excellent. And thank all of you very much for supporting Sunstone.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks.